Hello and welcome to another Online Perspectives talk. Some of us met together via Zoom, of course, at 8:30 in the morning on the first Saturday in December, and a few of us were even eating our breakfasts while we talked, just like we usually do. After time to chat and reconnect with friends we haven't seen for a time, we welcomed our speaker. Paul Revill is a Baptist minister based in Prudhoe who's spoken to us before about his own journey of faith. And last autumn, Paul was able to walk the Camino de Santiago. Today, he told us a little about that experience and some of what he learned during a 500-mile, 5-week journey on foot. Paul has recorded an extended version of his presentation, and I'll let him introduce it now.
Hello, I'm Paul Revill, Baptist minister, living in Prudhoe in the Tyne Valley, and I'm one of the many that has been part of Perspectives men's breakfasts over the last few years. I've spoken on a couple of occasions, and had we been meeting live, I might have had the opportunity to share in person. But I'm going to give you a talk on video about what I was doing a year ago in the autumn of 2019 when I took a pilgrimage, a journey of 500 miles on the well-known route of the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain. So sit back, relax, enjoy the pictures, and here is my account of my journey on the Camino. I've been drawn to pilgrimage over a number of years. We're very fortunate in the northeast to have some historic and some more recent pilgrim routes. Some of you will be aware that the Diocese of Durham and Durham Cathedral have launched some new Northern Saints trails which all connect to Durham Cathedral. One starts in the Tyne Valley at Heavenfield at the ancient battle site there. We've got St Oswald's Way that links Heavenfield and Holy Island. We've got St Cuthbert's Way just in the Scottish borders, and there are other routes as well. I love walking and I love God, and I find that walking and being out and about, God speaks to me through what I see, through the natural world, and there's something about that physical process of walking that enables me to focus, that gives me space and time. It slows me down from the usual rush of life. And there are lots of aspects of the discipline of pilgrimage that are very helpful spiritually. Pilgrimage, of course, is a biblical thing. Here's a verse from Psalm 84, which became my kind of theme verse in 2019 as I prepared for my sabbatical and the Camino de Santiago. Blessed are those whose strength in you. Sorry, I'll say it again. Blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. Pilgrimage was something that the Jews practiced 3 times a year at the very least. The 3 great festivals in Jerusalem of Passover, of Pentecost and of Tabernacles. And so it was part of Jesus' routine growing up, and one of the key stories of his youth, the only story of his childhood, is Jesus going on pilgrimage with his parents and then staying behind in Jerusalem. And of course Jesus continued to visit Jerusalem for the pilgrim festivals. And the Christian faith became known, or the followers of Jesus, as people who were of the way. Followers of the way is how they're called in the book of Acts. And we see in Jesus, and we see of Jesus' followers, people who were always on the move, who were travelling. Somebody's once said that it's when the Church of God settles down and becomes static and ceases to move, that's when problems set in. So let me tell you about the Santiago pilgrimage. There are lots of routes to Santiago. I was following the best known one. If some of you have watched the film The Way, starring Martin Sheen, I can recommend it. It's about 10 years old now, but it showcases the French way from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on the border of France and Spain through to Santiago and then beyond to the coast at Finisterre. You pass through the Pyrenees. The first day is climbing up and over the Pyrenees from France into Spain. You visit cities like Pamplona, famous for the running of the bulls and the San Fermin festival. Logroño, which is at the heart of the Rioja wine district. The wine and the food are fantastic along the route, I should say. You get to Burgos, which has a most superb medieval cathedral. You then pass through the Meseta, which is the upland plains, very flat, in some ways very boring, but a landscape that enables, because there's not so much to see, you develop your thinking inwardly and you focus inwardly, and things start coming to the surface that maybe have been hidden thus far. Then you get to Leon, which is another great medieval city, place of culture, with another fantastic cathedral with the most beautiful stained glass. You then climb up to the Cruz de Ferro, which is the highest point on the route at 1,500 metres above sea level. So there's not a lot of really steep climbing, just 2 or 3 days when you have to climb. It's fairly easy and fairly walkable for many people. And the Cruz de Ferro is where pilgrims often leave a stone that they've carried with them as a symbol of something they want to leave behind. Maybe they're remembering somebody they're grieving. There's a lot of people that leave stones just as a way of saying, I'm offering this person this grief to you, God. And then you get into Galicia, the northwestern province, which is the kind of Celtic part of Spain. Very green, in some very granity rocks, so in some ways quite similar to places like Cornwall and Brittany. And you get to this wonderful place, Santiago, which is supposedly where the bones of St. James, the Apostle, brother of John, were brought to Spain by his disciples and buried, and then rediscovered in the 8th century and reburied in this cathedral built over the top. It's been a place of pilgrimage for about 1,000 years. And unlike a lot of pilgrimage routes, there have always been pilgrims since the beginning of the Middle Ages walking this route. The numbers dwindled to almost nothing in the 1970s, but over the last 40 years, I would say, they have grown almost exponentially, so that now around 300,000 people make the pilgrimage to Santiago every year. Not this year, unfortunately, because of COVID, but in most years. And they come from all over the world. I met people from at least 30 different nations while I was walking. And it's not just people of faith, it's people who are of no faith, people who are seekers, people who just are drawn to something more than a holiday, who recognise there is something transformational about doing a pilgrimage walk, and who hear stories of what it's done for other people. And for those who wish to, they can go on beyond Santiago to the coast at Finisterre. And at Finisterre there's a lighthouse, a promontory of rock that juts out into the Atlantic, and for pre-Columbus era generations, of course, this was literally what it's called, the end of land, Finisterre, Land's End. And as far as people knew, that was where the known world finished and the unknown stretched out in front of them, a very mysterious and mystical place. So, as I say, pilgrims come from all over the world to do this walk. You can walk as much of it or as little of it as you want. The whole thing that I walked from Saint-Jean to Santiago is 800 kilometres or 500 miles. Took me 34 days. That's probably about an average of 15 miles a day, 25 kilometres a day walking. I grew a beard along the route, as you can see from the picture, and I had some amazing experiences, and I felt that God worked quite deeply in me. I'll talk about some of these in a moment. But just to give you an example of what a typical pilgrim day looks like, you stay generally, most people anyway, in these hostels called albergues. And the wonderful thing about the Camino route is that it is a place where there is still a great tradition of hospitality practice. There is this infrastructure of support to help pilgrims. So there are these hostels, there are cafes and bars that cater to the pilgrims, there are shops that provide all that you need. But there's also this culture of hospitality and this attitude amongst other pilgrims of looking out for one another, supporting each other, helping each other. People give freely to other pilgrims. People help each other, help pilgrims when there is any kind of need. So, for example, one night I just witnessed in one of the hostels, the hospitaliero, the man who was running the hostel. He had a line of people waiting to have their foot blisters punctured and the fluid drained out. And this hospitaliero was very skilled at dealing with blisters. So he had a line of people all waiting to have their foot blisters dealt with. And this guy who was willing tenderly to hold the feet of these pilgrims and to put the needle in and to thread some thread through and just to let the fluid drain out. Fortunately, I didn't have too many problems like that, at least with my feet. I had one or two problems with other bits of me, but that's another story. So your day typically starts when you wake up in the hostel at maybe 6 o'clock, 5, 6. The first 2 nights we had an alarm call at 6 with the 2 hostels I stayed in playing Gregorian chant to wake you up, which is a most wonderful alarm call to have monks singing plain song to wake you up. You might have your breakfast in the hostel, or you might just leave very early in the dark and find a cafe along the road. You generally start while it's still dark, and the wonderful experience for many of the days was to see the sun come up behind me. You're walking away from the sunrise, you're walking from east to west, but the sky lightens, the clouds go beautiful colours, and then you see the sun coming up, and the sun casting its long shadows as it just starts to catch the hills first and then the ground in front of you. It was so often just a beautiful, wonderful experience. You walk for as long as you wish to that day, and I generally decided not to book ahead. Again, this infrastructure means you don't need to book ahead. You can just turn up at a hostel. There's usually room for you, except in the very busiest seasons of the year. I was walking late September and most of October last year. And there was always space for me, so I could guarantee I could turn up at a hostel and there'd be room. And so you just walk for as long as you feel you want to, as long as your body lets you, or you stop at a place that you think this is a nice place to stop for the end of this day. Generally, I would finish between midday and maybe 2 o'clock, and then you have the afternoon and the evening free. Some people get bored. But I always found, because it was a deliberately prayerful experience, I was using this Camino journey to basically give space and time for God to do what God wanted to do with me. And so I had this afternoon and evening just to be open to God. And what I found was, you do some regular things like washing your clothes, having a shower, getting clean, changing into a clean pair of clothes. Obviously, you carry as little as you possibly can, because everything you take, you've got to carry in a backpack. Some people do have them transported by a baggage service, but I carried 10 kilos in my pack, and so that was just a couple of changes of clothes. So you need to wash those regularly. But I also like to do drawing, sketching, so I would find somewhere local and just do a little sketch. Maybe find a church to sit in and be quiet and to pray and to read the Bible. And then in the evening you have your pilgrim meal. Sometimes the hostels organise one and you can have one in the hostel. Sometimes you go out to a local cafe or restaurant and they have what they call a pilgrim menu. Or I met one friend, a guy called Alex, who was a real party animal, and he's from London but had lived quite a few years in Spain, so spoke very good Spanish. He would organise tapas tours in some of the big towns and cities. So I went on 2 or 3 of Alex's tapas tours, which were quite an adventure in and of themselves. And that really gets you into the local cuisine, and I really enjoyed that. But just to make things a bit more relevant for where we're at in the pandemic, I just want to maybe highlight a couple of things that I've learnt through doing the pilgrimage that have also been helpful in the lockdown and in the pandemic, because some of the disciplines that you and practices that you pick up on a pilgrimage like this over a whole month have served me well in the months since. So the first is learning about simplicity. As I've said, you have to simplify very, very much on a pilgrimage journey. You leave most of your stuff behind. You realise actually you can live quite easily and quite happily and actually in a very fulfilled way with just a few belongings in a backpack. We don't need loads of stuff to get the most out of life, and it's a very liberating thing to get rid, at least for a period, of lots of the paraphernalia. What I also did was try to live more simply in terms of the internet. I didn't surf the web at all. I didn't do any social media. I kept that kind of thing to a minimum. I only corresponded just by text back to my family at the end of each day to let them know that I was still okay. And that thinning down, stripping back, that's something we've had to do during the pandemic to a degree. We've had to strip back from some of the things we might normally do, the holidays we might normally take, or the social life that we might normally have. And it's been tough for a lot of people. But I think for me, having had that experience on the Camino helped me with the experience of lockdown, because I'd already been through a stripping back. Second thing that you learn as a pilgrim is attentiveness, to notice stuff. You slow down, you go at walking pace. And so I've described the sunrise. I would just be trying to look carefully at what I was passing through. I didn't have music playing in headphones. I kept my eyes and ears very much open to what was around. And so I tried to notice things. You have to keep your eyes open anyway, because you're following the yellow arrows which are painted along the way to point the right route to help you avoid getting lost. It's pretty hard to get lost on the Camino. The arrows are at all the junctions to point you the right way. And every time you see a yellow arrow, you think, that's good, I'm still on the right way. And so noticing stuff, being attentive. But I was also learning to pay attention to people, to start to maybe look people more closely in the eyes and to see into them, to try and feel more of a connection with people. I was trying to listen carefully to what people were saying, because all kinds of different people, you maybe meet some just for a few minutes or an hour along the road as you're talking, or maybe over a meal. Some I got to know better because we spent more than one day together. But that attentiveness to others, and of course alongside that attentiveness to God. I had a wonderful experience one night, and I think it was because I was becoming attentive. It was the fifth day into my journey. I stopped at a place called Casa Mágica, an albergue, probably about 100 kilometres into the journey. And that night, as I was drifting off to sleep, in the room, I was the last one to go to sleep. The other guys in the room were all hard at it, snoring away, and I was drifting off to sleep. But I just became aware, before I fell asleep, that God was present in this room. I had this strong, powerful awareness of the reality and the presence of God in a rare way, tangibly present, more present than anything else in that room at that time. And in particular, it was God's love that was filling that room. It was God's love that was filling my life. It was almost as if I was being immersed into an ocean of God's love. I could say more about it, but simply to say that was a wonderful gift of God, and it was about being attentive to Him and being open to Him. And so again, in the lockdown, we've had that opportunity, haven't we, with the daily walks, to be attentive to the birdsong and to our back gardens and just the local routes that we might have available to walk. And I've noticed things in Prudhoe, where I live, that I've never noticed before, and just appreciated the woodland at the back of my house, and appreciated the fields and just the changing of the seasons. Notice things that normally in the busyness of life I might just fail to notice. And God is in these things. If we slow down and we take notice, then God speaks to us. It's all about taking the time to be attentive. And then I learned something about trust as well. Trust in a God who would provide for my needs. There's a phrase along the Camino. The Camino will provide. And lots of pilgrims experience this, that when they're in a particular need, provision just comes. Provision is there at the point in which they need it. There were a few times, for example, when I did take a wrong turn. And every single one of those wrong turns, somebody was there to say, no, you need to go this way. It happened every single time. And they were the only times I ever took a wrong turn. And somebody every time put me right. So I never got lost. Just one example of God's provision. There were one or two occasions when I rolled in very late to a town, having done a longer day's walk, and didn't know where I was going to stay, and God provided direction to a particular hostel. There was one where I remember a woman came out of a bar, and I recognised her because I'd seen her a few days previously. Swedish woman called Suzanne. I now call her my Camino angel. She just came as a messenger from God. And I said to Suzanne, I'm stuck here. I've been wandering around. I can't find anywhere to stay. It's getting late. Do you know anywhere good to stay? And she said, follow me. And she led me to this Benedictine monastery. And there was one place left in that monastery that night, and I had the most wonderful evening there. So learning to put yourself in a place where you have to trust God. I deliberately tried to be a bit more dependent on God. I gave my guidebook away. After I had the experience of God's love, that encounter, I just felt God leading me to give away some of my things. I gave away my guidebook and said, okay, God, you're going to have to lead me now. I'm going to have to trust in you to take me to the right place each night. I'm not going to plan ahead. I'm quite a planner. And I think it was a helpful discipline to stop planning, to stop organising things myself. So many of us, we plan our lives. And actually by doing that, we plan God out. We lose that spontaneity. We lose that dependence upon God to provide and to trust him. Most of us never really have to trust in God for financial provision or other provision, because we've got it all planned and organised ourselves. It's only when we're in that need, and we put ourselves sometimes in that need, that we find that God is able to meet those needs. I wonder whether we can do that. Again, in the lockdown, I guess we have had to trust God because things have been taken away. Some of us are trusting God for income because we have been furloughed or lost our jobs. Others are having to trust God with our health and our fears and worries over that. So I guess in the last 8 months or so, we've had to go on a journey, many of us, to a greater dependence upon God and his provision. And I hope your experience has been the same as mine, that God does provide. And then the last point I'd like to make is about hardships. One of the things that I picked up right at the beginning of my journey was, I'd read it somewhere, I think in my guidebook when I still had it, that we should see difficulties and problems as opportunities to learn, opportunities for God to provide something, or the Camino to provide something in a fresh way. And I learned that on the very first day, or the day before I started the walk, because I arrived by plane to Biarritz. I got a taxi to Bayonne, nearby city just in the south of France. Stayed in the hotel there by the railway station. And my plan, because I was very planful, as I say, was to get the train from Bayonne to Saint-Jean to start the journey. So I rock up at the railway station nice and early, try to buy a ticket, and the machine won't give me a ticket and it's not registering. There's some phrase that comes up and my French wasn't good enough to understand what it meant. I tried to find somebody in the station to talk to. There was nobody staffing the station at all. It was like a ghost town. And I couldn't understand what was wrong, and I couldn't get my train. I thought, well, how on earth am I going to get down to Saint-Jean, which is a good hour by train, when there are no trains running? I didn't know if there were buses or there are other means of transport. Anyway, I found myself in the tourist information. I was asking the woman there, and she was telling me that there was a train strike on. Now, I don't want to be mean and to stereotype the French industrial workers, but I wasn't too surprised when she explained. But I then realised, well, maybe this hardship, maybe this difficulty is not just so much of a problem, but it's an opportunity. That God has something to teach me in and through this. And I should embrace this and welcome this and thank God for this hardship and this difficulty, because something new is going to come out of it. I went into the cathedral for a little bit. I walked around the cloisters, the beautiful cloisters there, and I prayed. And I just sensed God was with me, and I had to trust God with this. I was still a bit anxious, but I went back to the railway station. And then this time I saw a group of 4 other Camino pilgrims. They all had their backpacks and their walking poles. I thought they're Camino pilgrims making their way to Saint-Jean. And I went up to them, and actually 3 of the 4 were English. And I said, what are you doing? And we decided together to share the cost of a taxi, and it worked out relatively cost effective to do that, 5 of us in a taxi. But what I gained through that was I got 4 new friends, and 2 of those in particular have stayed good friends with me even to this day. And I met them because of that hardship and that difficulty. So one door of my planning closed, and a better door of God's planning opened up. And of course, we've been through many hardships, haven't we, in the last 8 months? Our nation has, our world has. And that's not to say that they're things to be rejoiced over, but we are nevertheless told by St. Paul to give thanks always, to pray continually, to rejoice. And so there is joy, but there's also provision, there's also learning. And I wonder what you've learnt through the hardships of the lockdown. Some of us have learned practical things like how to make videos, how to use live streaming for church services and such like. We've become much more internet savvy. I'm an expert on Zoom now, which I never was before. And there's practical things that we learn. But also, I think we've learned more about actually what really matters in this world. We've learned that relationships really matter much more than holidays or leisure time and entertainment so often. It's the people that we miss the most when we can't physically be together, isn't it? And maybe we've learned that God actually is more important to us than we realise. Many people are coming to God or are open to God in this time of pandemic. So there's lots of things that you learn along the way on the trail to Santiago. I could mention many more. And maybe at some point I could do a part 2 if you're interested. We'll see what the feedback is. If any of you ever have the opportunity, I would really wholeheartedly commend a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. It's the most wonderful, and for me it was a life-changing experience, and one that I would rate as being the most significant things that I've ever done in my life.